Millionaire CEO gave her a day to leave. 5 years later, he'd do anything for a moment with his girl. There are two types of regret, the kind that fades with time, and the kind that grows sharper every single day, cutting deeper until you can't remember what it felt like to breathe without pain. Griffin Ashford spent 5 years discovering which one destroys you faster. And it started the moment he watched a woman he didn't recognize walk onto a stage carrying the daughter he never knew existed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to when he still believed power could protect him from consequences. Hi, my lovely family. Welcome back to Mr. William Chronicles, where every story carries a life lesson worth remembering. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you're here. Show some love and hit that subscribe button and become part of this amazing community of story lovers. Let me speak a blessing over you. May you never carry shame for what was done to you. May your children inherit your strength, not your scars. And when those who erased you come back seeking forgiveness, may you have the clarity to know that healing doesn't require their presence, only your peace. Bryn Holloway learned early that silence is weight, the kind that fills rooms when you're the only person who earned their seat instead of inheriting it. The kind that follows you from scholarship lines into boardrooms where everyone else's grandfather knew everyone else's grandfather. She'd clawed her way from financial analyst to director at Meridian Capital in 3 years. 18-hour days. Weekends that bled into weekdays. A student loan balance that had its own interest payments. But she was good at her job, better than good. She saw patterns other people missed, made connections that turned failing companies into success stories. That's what she was doing at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in the parking garage. Leaving. Again. Always leaving after everyone else, because proving yourself never stops when you started from nothing. Griffin's car wouldn't start. She heard him cursing 2 rows over, saw the interior light flickering in that way that meant a dead battery and a ruined night. She had jumper cables in her trunk. Her cousin's hand-me-down sedan came with them, and she'd never bothered taking them out. Need help? He looked up. Expensive suit, loosened tie, the particular exhaustion of someone who'd forgotten why they were running but couldn't figure out how to stop. She recognized it because she wore it too. Battery's dead, he said. I've got roadside assistance, but it'll take an hour. She popped her trunk. I've got cables. 5 minutes. They didn't talk while the cars charged. Just stood there in fluorescent lighting, both too tired to perform whatever corporate dance their positions probably required. She didn't know who he was yet. He didn't care who she was. When his engine turned over, he said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't mention it." Then, because exhaustion makes people honest, "Do you ever wonder what we're doing this for?" He looked at her like she'd asked the one question he'd been avoiding for years. They talked for 40 minutes in that garage. About nothing important. About everything that mattered. How success felt like drowning in applause. How money built walls that kept out everything, including the things you actually needed. How neither of them could remember the last time someone asked how they felt instead of what they'd accomplished. She learned his name when he handed her his business card before leaving. Griffin Ashford, CEO. The same firm that was buying out half of Meridian's portfolio. He learned hers 3 weeks later, when he called her into a meeting she hadn't been invited to and offered her a job she hadn't applied for. Chief Strategy Officer, he said, sliding the offer letter across his desk. You see things other people don't. I need that. The salary made her student loans look like pocket change. The opportunity was impossible. The risk was enormous. Taking a position from a man she'd had one honest conversation with, leaving security for potential. She said yes anyway, because hunger recognizes hunger, and she'd been starving her whole life. They became inevitable slowly, then all at once. Late nights became shared takeout, became conversations that peeled back layers neither of them knew they'd built. He told her about a childhood where affection came with conditions and love had price tags. She told him about growing up where every meal was a calculation and every opportunity felt like stealing from someone who deserved it more. He kissed her first. In his office during a thunderstorm, rain hammering floor-to-ceiling windows, while the city glowed 40 stories below. She kissed him back because she'd stopped pretending she didn't want to. The affair was brief, reckless, consuming. They kept it hidden, not from shame, but survival. Office relationships ended careers, especially when one person controlled the other's future. But hiding something doesn't make it less real. It just makes it burn hotter. For months in, he proposed. Not at a restaurant. Not on a beach. Tuesday morning in her apartment. Coffee going cold between them. Both wearing yesterday's clothes after working through the night on a merger that would define the quarter. No ring. No plan. Just a question asked like a prayer. Build this life with me. Not the performance. The real thing. She said yes. They married at a courthouse the following week. Strangers as witnesses. Lunch break, wedding. Back to work by 2 p.m. like nothing had changed, even though everything had. For 6 months, they existed in a secret world where they were partners in every sense. Equals who challenged each other, protected each other, completed each other. He stopped performing the CEO role when they were alone. She stopped performing the woman who had everything figured out. They were just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their own ambition. Before we get into how everything fell apart, do me a favor. Subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because you're the family that keeps these stories alive. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. Then Douglas Crane walked into a board meeting, smiled with cold precision, and asked one simple question that changed everything. Griffin, are you sure your wife is the right fit for this company's future? Perfect doesn't survive when poison is patience. Manipulation doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick down doors or make threats. It whispers. It plants seeds. It convinces you that your own thoughts are the problem. Douglas Crane had perfected the art over 30 years in boardrooms where reputations died quietly. He'd known Griffin's father, served on 3 boards with the family, had that particular credibility that comes from old money and older connections. When he joined Griffin's board, everyone celebrated. A legend lending his expertise to a young CEO still proving himself. Nobody saw the knife until it was already buried. It started small. Brin's community reinvestment proposal is bold, Crane would say in meetings, nodding thoughtfully. Perhaps too bold for our current investors. They're nervous about risk. Then, privately to Griffin, I love her passion. Truly. But passion without restraint is just liability wearing a smile. He never criticized her directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he questioned timing, expressed concern, wondered aloud if emotional decision-making was clouding strategic judgment. Is she advising you as your CSO, he asked Griffin over scotch one evening, or as your wife? The question lodged itself like a splinter. Griffin started noticing things he hadn't before. How Brin pushed back in meetings. How she challenged projections that prioritized profit over people. How she refused to cut corners that would hurt employees. He'd loved that about her once. Crane made him wonder if love had blinded him to weakness. The change in Griffin happened gradually. He worked later, came home quieter, looked through Brin instead of at her. When she asked what was wrong, he said he was tired. When she pushed harder, he pulled away entirely. She felt him slipping but couldn't figure out why. Every conversation became a minefield. Every question felt like an accusation she hadn't made. He started treating her like a problem that needed solving instead of a partner who already understood. Board meetings became. Crane would present data, always framed carefully, always technically accurate, that painted Brin's strategies as costly mistakes. Griffin stopped defending her, started asking her to justify decisions he'd once championed. Maybe Douglas has a point, he said one night, reviewing financials in bed. We're bleeding money on programs that won't show returns for years. Returns aren't always measured in dollars, she replied. Then what are they measured in? Good intentions. The cruelty in his voice shocked them both. The pregnancy happened during their last good weekend. They'd driven upstate, trying to remember who they'd been before ambition and fear rebuilt the walls. No phones. No work. Just 2 days pretending the cracks weren't showing. They made love in a cabin that smelled like pine and wood smoke, desperate and tender in equal measure. Like they both knew they were trying to save something already dying, but couldn't admit it out loud. 3 weeks later, Bryn sat in her car outside a pharmacy, staring at 2 pink lines that confirmed what her body had been telling her for days. She should have felt joy. She felt terror instead. How do you tell your husband you're carrying his child when he barely looks at you anymore? When every conversation ends in silence or shouting? When the man you married has been replaced by someone who treats you like an enemy? She tried for a week to find the right moment. It never came. The board meeting happened on a Thursday. Bryn wasn't invited. That should have been her first warning. Crane presented a report. 60 slides of carefully selected data showing how Bryn's initiatives were dragging down quarterly performance. He acknowledged her intentions were good, praised her dedication, then systematically destroyed every program she'd built. The company is at a crossroads, he concluded. We either prioritize shareholder value or we continue down a path that's costing us credibility and capital. He didn't say fire Bryn. He didn't have to. The board voted to restructure strategy leadership. Corporate speak for erasing her influence. Griffin didn't fight it, didn't defend her, just nodded and said he'd handle the transition. Crane smiled, subtle, satisfied. Griffin came home that night with poison in his veins and accusations on his tongue. The board wants you out. Bryn looked up from the couch where she'd been rehearsing how to tell him about the baby. What? Your programs are bleeding money. Investors are threatening to pull out. We're losing ground to competitors because we're too busy trying to save the world instead of running a business. Those programs work, she said, standing. They just take time. Time we don't have. The board thinks you're a liability. And what do you think? The pause before he answered told her everything. I think you let your emotions override your judgment. I think you're so focused on proving something that you can't see you're destroying what we've built. What we've built. Her voice cracked. I helped build this company. Those strategies you're calling liabilities? They came from me. The merger that saved us last year? Mine. The retention program that cut turnover by 40%? Mine. And the community initiative that cost us 3 major investors? Also yours. She stared at him. This man who'd asked her to build a real life with him, who'd promised partnership, who'd held her at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep because the weight of expectations felt crushing. Gone. Replaced by someone who sounded exactly like Douglas Crane. This is him, she said quietly. Everything you're saying right now, it's Douglas talking through you. Can't you hear it? Don't, Griffin snapped. Don't make this about him. This is about you not being able to separate personal feelings from professional responsibility. I'm pregnant. The words came out like a gunshot. Sharp. Final. Echoing in the sudden silence. Griffin froze. His face went blank, processing, calculating. She watched him do the math, timing, implications, complications. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice. This changes absolutely nothing. Not excitement. Not fear. Not even anger. Just cold assessment of how an unplanned pregnancy complicated his already complicated situation. Bryn felt something inside her crack. Not break. Breaking would have been kinder. This was shattering. The kind of destruction that leaves pieces you can never put back together. Get out, she whispered. Bryn. Get out. He left. She heard his car start, drive away. Sat in the silence of their apartment. His apartment, really. She'd just been living in it. And understood with perfect clarity that Crane had won. The man she'd married was gone. Maybe he'd never existed. Maybe she just wanted so badly to believe someone could love her without conditions that she'd imagined the whole thing. She packed a bag that night. Not everything. Just enough to survive. Just enough to remember who she'd been before she'd let herself believe in fairy tales. When she walked out, she didn't look back. Looking back is how you turn into salt. Griffin woke up the next morning convinced he'd made the right choice. That protecting the company meant protecting their future. That Bryn would cool down, come back, and they'd figure it out like adults. He was wrong about all of it. There's a specific kind of erasure that happens when powerful people decide you never mattered. It doesn't happen slowly. It happens while you're still processing the betrayal, still believing there's a chance for conversation, for clarity, for basic human decency. Bryn spent the night at a hotel she couldn't afford, phone in her hand, waiting for Griffin to call, to apologize, to say he'd been scared and angry and said things he didn't mean. He never called. By morning, the locks were changed. She found out when she went back to get more clothes. Her key didn't work. She stood there, trying it 3 times like the problem was her technique, not his decision. Security showed up within minutes. Professional, apologetic, clearly briefed. Ms. Holloway, Mr. Ashford has requested that you schedule a time to collect your belongings. We're happy to arrange that, but you can't enter the building unannounced. She'd lived there for 8 months. Married the man who owned it. Slept in his bed last week. Now she needed an appointment. When can I get my things? I'll have someone contact you to coordinate. They never did. Her work access was revoked by noon. Email bounced. Security badge deactivated. She tried calling Griffin's assistant, the woman who'd helped her book conference rooms and order lunch for late meetings, and got transferred to HR. Ms. Holloway, we're processing your departure. A representative will reach out regarding your severance package and final arrangements. I need to speak to Griffin. Mr. Ashford is unavailable. All matters should go through HR. She wanted to scream that she wasn't just an employee, that they were married, that she was carrying his child and deserved more than corporate protocol. Instead, she hung up, because screaming at assistants, following orders wouldn't change anything. The severance check arrived by courier 3 days later. 6 months' salary. Generous by most standards. Insulting given everything. It came with a non-disclosure agreement. 12 pages of legal language that boiled down to, take this money, shut up about everything, disappear quietly. She read it in her hotel room, while morning sickness made her stomach revolt. There was a section about protecting company interests and maintaining professional confidentiality, and refraining from disparaging statements. Nothing about their marriage. Nothing acknowledging that she'd helped build half the strategies he was now claiming as solely his vision. Nothing admitting she existed as anything more than a former employee who needed to be managed. Sign here. Stay silent. Vanish. She signed it. Not because she wanted to, because pride doesn't pay rent, and the baby growing inside her needed more than her rage to survive. The job hunt was brutal. Every interview started promising. Her resume was impressive. Her track record spoke for itself. Then someone would make a call, do a reference check, ask the wrong person the right question. The offers stopped coming. Nobody said it directly. They just stopped returning her emails. Went with another candidate whose experience was a better fit. Told her they'd keep her resume on file. She knew what they were really saying. Too much drama. Too much risk. Too much of whatever quality companies associate with women who get involved with their bosses, and then things go wrong. It didn't matter that Griffin had pursued her, that she'd been qualified for every position she'd held, that their relationship had been mutual and real until Crane poisoned it. The story people told was simpler. Ambitious woman sleeps her way up, crashes and burns. Now she's someone else's problem. Her savings evaporated faster than she'd thought possible. Hotel became extended stay, became a room in her cousin's house in a neighborhood where sirens were the soundtrack, and the heat barely worked. Maya didn't ask questions, just cleared space, and said Bryn could stay as long as she needed. I'll be out of your way soon, Bryn promised. Maya looked at her growing belly and didn't argue. She took jobs that paid cash and didn't ask questions. Cleaned houses while her stomach grew heavy and her back screamed. Scrubbed toilets for women who'd never worried about money a day in their lives, who complained about their cleaning lady being late while Bryn bit back nausea and kept working. Delivered food in a car that barely ran. Drove through snow and rain for tips that sometimes didn't come. Smiled through pain when customers wanted to chat. Saved every dollar like her life depended on it. Because it did. Worked retail during the holidays. Standing for 8-hour shifts while the baby pressed on her bladder, and swelling made her feet feel like they'd explode. Folded clothes that cost more than she made in a week. Helped women buy things they didn't need while she calculated whether she could afford groceries and prenatal vitamins both. The exhaustion was complete. Physical, emotional, spiritual. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. to work a cleaning job, deliver food through lunch, stock shelves until 10 p.m., sleep for 5 hours, and do it again. The clinic waiting rooms were the worst. Forms that asked about the father, his medical history, his contact information, whether he'd be involved in prenatal care. She left them blank. Wrote not applicable in careful letters. The nurses noticed. They always noticed. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked judgmental. None of them asked directly, which was good, because Bryn didn't have an answer that wouldn't break her. How do you explain that the father doesn't know? That he threw you away before you could tell him properly? That he's a millionaire who could afford the best care in the world while you're sitting here with Medicaid forms and borrowed insurance? He's not involved became her standard response. Simple. Final. True enough. 7 months pregnant. She sat in Maya's car outside a grocery store and cried until she couldn't breathe. Not because of one thing. Because of everything. Because her body hurt and her heart hurt and she couldn't remember what it felt like to not be tired. Because she was bringing a child into a world where she couldn't guarantee basic stability. Because the man she'd loved had erased her like she'd never mattered. Because fighting was exhausting, and she wasn't sure she had any fight left. Maya found her there an hour later. Didn't say anything. Just climbed in the passenger seat and sat with her while Bryn fell apart. "I can't do this," Bryn sobbed. "I can't. I'm not strong enough." "Yes, you are. You don't know that. I know you survived every other impossible thing. I know you're still here. I know you haven't given up, or you wouldn't be crying in this parking lot. You'd be gone already." Bryn wiped her face with shaking hands. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail forward. But you won't. Because women like us don't get the option to fail. We survive because we don't have a choice. And then we do more than survive. We build something nobody can take away." That night, Bryn made a promise to the baby growing inside her. She didn't know if promises meant anything anymore. Didn't know if she believed in happy endings or justice or any of the things she'd been raised to trust. But she knew this. They would survive. Not because the world would help them. Not because anyone would save them. Because she'd been poor before. Been broken before. Been counted out before. And she'd always been too stubborn to stay down. Griffin never called. Never checked in. Never wondered if she was okay. He convinced himself that silence was kindness. That giving her space was respect. That she'd reach out if she needed anything. He was a coward disguising fear as consideration. And by the time he realized it, she was already gone. Labor started at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in February. Bryn woke to pain that felt like her body was tearing itself apart from the inside. Not the practice contractions she'd been having for weeks. Real ones. The kind that steal your breath and make you understand why people scream. She was alone. Maya had worked a double shift and wouldn't be home until morning. The apartment was dark except for the street light bleeding through thin curtains. Bryn sat up, felt wetness, realized her water had broken. 35 weeks. The baby was coming early. She called an ambulance because driving herself wasn't an option, and calling anyone else felt like admitting she had nobody. The operator stayed on the line, asked questions Bryn answered between contractions that were already coming too fast. "How far apart are the contractions?" "For minutes. Maybe less." "Is anyone with you?" "No." The pause on the other end was brief but heavy. "Ambulance is 7 minutes out. Stay calm. You're doing great." Bryn wasn't doing great. She was terrified. County General Hospital at 3 a.m. was fluorescent lights and exhausted nurses and the smell of antiseptic that didn't quite cover everything else. They wheeled her into labor and delivery, asked for insurance, asked for emergency contacts, asked who to call when the baby came. "Nobody," Bryn said through gritted teeth. "There's nobody." The nurse, older, kind eyes, Hands that had done this 1,000 times, squeezed her shoulder. Then we'll be your people tonight. You're not alone, sweetheart. Bryn wanted to believe her. 22 hours. That's how long it took. 22 hours of pain that rewrote her understanding of what a body could endure. Contractions that felt like dying. Exhaustion, so complete she couldn't remember her own name between pushes. The nurses rotated shifts. New faces, same encouragement. You're doing amazing. Almost there. Just a little more. But Bryn wasn't amazing. She was breaking. Every hour that passed took something from her she couldn't get back. Strength. Hope. The belief that she could actually do this. Around hour 15, she started crying. Not from pain, from the crushing weight of doing this alone. Of bringing a child into the world without a partner to hold her hand or tell her she was strong or promise everything would be okay. Griffin should have been here. Should have been pacing the waiting room or holding her hand or doing anything except existing somewhere else, completely unaware that his daughter was fighting to be born. I can't, she sobbed to the nurse, checking her vitals. I can't do this anymore. You can. You are. This baby is almost here, and she needs you to keep going. What if I'm not enough? The nurse, her name tag said Patricia, looked her dead in the eyes. You've been enough for 9 months. You'll be enough for the rest of her life. Now breathe through this contraction, and let's meet your daughter. Haven Ashford Holloway arrived at 12:47 a.m. on Thursday, February 14th. 5 weeks early. For pounds, 11 ounces. Screaming before she'd fully entered the world. Tiny fists waving like she was ready to fight everything that had tried to stop her. They put her on Bryn's chest immediately, skin to skin. This impossibly small, impossibly perfect human who'd grown inside her during the worst months of her life. Haven's eyes opened. Dark blue, unfocused, searching. Her tiny hand wrapped around Bryn's finger with surprising strength. And Bryn understood, in that moment, what love actually meant. Not the romantic kind that comes with promises and passion and inevitable disappointment. The kind that doesn't have conditions. That doesn't need anything in return. That would burn the whole world down to keep this one small person safe. Hi, baby, Bryn whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm your mom. And I promise, you will always be enough. You will always be wanted. You will always be safe. Haven made a small sound. Not quite a cry. Almost like she understood. The first week was survival in its purest form. Haven was too small to regulate her temperature. Too early to nurse properly. The NICU kept her for 5 days while Bryn recovered and learned how to be a mother to a baby she could only hold during scheduled times. She slept in the hospital. Refused to leave even though they said she could go home. Home was Maya's crowded apartment. Here, Haven was close. Here, Bryn could sit by the incubator and watch her daughter's tiny chest rise and fall, and count it as proof that miracles existed. The nurses taught her everything. How to change a diaper on a baby who weighed less than a bag of sugar. How to bottle feed when nursing wouldn't work. How to read Haven's cries. Hungry, tired, uncomfortable, scared. You're natural, Patricia said, watching Bryn hold Haven during one feeding. Bryn laughed bitterly. I'm terrified every second. That's how you know you're doing it right. The ones who aren't scared are the ones you worry about. They went home on a Tuesday. Home. Maya's spare room with a bassinet borrowed from a neighbor and clothes from the Goodwill and a determination so fierce it felt like armor. The first night alone with Haven, Bryn didn't sleep. Just watched her breathe. Counted every tiny exhale like it was proof they'd both survived something impossible. Haven woke every 2 hours. Needed to be fed, changed, soothed back to sleep. Bryn moved through the motions like a zombie. Made bottles at 3 a.m. with eyes that wouldn't stay open. Changed diapers in the dark. Rocked her daughter while humming songs she half remembered from childhood. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. It was also the first time in months she felt like she had a purpose. Money was the constant enemy. Government assistance helped, WIC for formula, Medicaid for doctor visits, food stamps that barely stretched to cover groceries. Maya refused rent, but Bryn insisted on contributing something. $20 here, $50 there. whatever she could spare after buying diapers and formula and all the tiny things babies needed that nobody warned you about. She worked when she could, took Haven with her to cleaning jobs when clients allowed it, strapped her to her chest in a carrier Maya found at a yard sale, and vacuumed around her while Haven slept, delivered food during nap times, rushing back before Haven woke up screaming. It wasn't sustainable. It barely qualified as living. But they were surviving. That counted for something. 3 months in, Bryn started filming their life. Not for pity, not for fame, because she needed to document that they existed. That single mothers working 3 jobs to afford formula weren't statistics. They were people. They were fighters. They deserved to be seen. She recorded videos on her cracked phone. Raw footage of 3 a.m. feedings and crying in the bathroom, and the impossible joy of Haven's first smile. Posted them online with captions that didn't sugarcoat anything. This is what poverty looks like when you're trying to raise a child alone. This is what happens when the system is designed to keep you down. This is what survival costs. The first video got 40 views. The second got 200. The third went viral. If you're still watching and your heart is breaking right now, hit that like button, because Bryn's story is just getting started. Drop a comment saying, "I see you, Bryn," if you're rooting for her. And subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles. Trust me, what happens next will restore your faith in justice. People responded. Thousands of them. Women who'd been there. Men who'd watched their mothers struggle. Humans who understood that the difference between survival and drowning was often just one missed paycheck. They shared her videos, sent donations she didn't ask for, offered advice and encouragement and the kind of community Bryn hadn't known she needed. Within 6 months, she had a platform. Within a year, publishers were calling. Within 2 years, she'd written a book that told the truth about single motherhood without apologizing for it. And Griffin? He had no idea any of it was happening. He'd moved on, convinced himself Bryn was fine somewhere, that she'd found her footing, that his silence was respect instead of cowardice. He was wrong, but he wouldn't figure that out until it was far too late. Success built from nothing hits different. It doesn't come with the safety net of family money or the comfort of knowing you can fail without consequences. It comes with scars and sleepless nights and the bone-deep knowledge that one wrong move sends you back to cleaning toilets for women who don't see you as human. Bryn understood this better than most. Year 1, survival. Her platform grew slowly, then explosively. Women found her videos because she spoke the language of struggle without performing it. She didn't cry for the camera or beg for sympathy. She just showed the truth, what it looked like to budget $17 for a week's groceries, to choose between heating and electricity, to smile at your baby while terror ate you alive inside. The comments flooded in. "This is my life. Nobody talks about this part. Thank you for making me feel less alone." Her follower count hit 50,000 in 8 months, then 100,000. Then 500,000 people watching a single mother refuse to break while the world tried its hardest to snap her in half. Book publishers reached out. Literary agents sent emails. Podcast hosts wanted interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the story about the woman who'd fallen from corporate heights and built something real from the wreckage. Year 2, the book, Enough, hit shelves in September and sold out in 3 days. It wasn't a memoir. Not really. It was a manifesto, raw testimony about what single motherhood actually cost, not in money alone, but in dignity stolen by systems designed to punish poverty. About working 3 jobs while people asked why you didn't just get a better job. About choosing between feeding your child and feeding yourself. About the violence of being invisible. Critics called it unflinching and necessary, and the conversation we've been avoiding. Readers called it the truth. It hit the bestseller list within 2 weeks. Stayed there for 11 months. Made Bryn more money than she'd earned in her entire corporate career. She bought a house, not a mansion, something modest in a neighborhood where Haven could play outside without Bryn holding her breath. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a mortgage that felt like proof she'd survived the unsurvivable. Haven turned 2 in that house. blew out candles on a homemade cake, opened presents Bryn had bought without checking her bank account first, smiled with Griffin's eyes and Bryn's determination, completely unaware that her existence had rewritten her mother's entire world. Year 3. The Foundation. Safe Harbor launched in January with a mission statement Bryn had written at 3 a.m. while Haven slept. Nobody should have to choose between being a parent and surviving. The programs were simple but radical. Childcare subsidies so mothers could work without spending their entire paycheck on daycare. Job training in fields that actually paid living wages. Mentorship from women who'd climbed out of poverty and understood the terrain. Corporate sponsors lined up. Not because they cared, most didn't, but because associating with Bryn's story made them look human. She took their money anyway, used it to fund programs that helped thousands of women who'd been exactly where she'd been. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd proposed these exact initiatives at Griffin's company 5 years ago. He'd let Crane convince him they were too expensive, too risky, too emotional. Now she was building them herself, funded by people who understood that investing in survival wasn't charity, it was justice. Year 4. Recognition. The speaking invitations came constantly. TEDx stages, university commencements, corporate conferences where executives paid thousands to hear a single mother tell them their policies were destroying lives. Bryn said yes to most of them, not for the money, though it helped, but because every stage was a chance to make people uncomfortable with their comfort. She spoke at Fortune 500 companies about how their family-friendly policies still assumed employees had partners to share the load. Called out tech giants for offering egg-freezing benefits while refusing to pay wages that let single parents afford rent. Stood in front of rooms full of power and said the quiet part loud. Your wealth is built on the backs of people you've decided don't deserve dignity. Some audiences hated her. Most couldn't look away. Her message was simple. Survival shouldn't be extraordinary. The fact that it is tells you everything about the system. Haven grew up in the middle of all this. At 4, she was curious and fearless. Asked questions Bryn couldn't always answer. Why don't I have a daddy? Where does he live? Does he know about me? Bryn had practiced these conversations in her head 1,000 times. Still wasn't ready when they actually happened. Your daddy and I knew each other a long time ago, she'd say, keeping her voice steady. Things didn't work out between us. But that doesn't mean you're not loved. You're the most loved person in the entire world. But where is he? I don't know, baby. But you have me, and Maya, and so many people who think you're amazing. That's more than enough. Haven would nod, seem satisfied, then ask again 3 weeks later. Each time, Bryn's heart broke a little more. Not for herself, for her daughter, who deserved a father who chose her. The media asked constantly, who's Haven's father? Will you tell us his identity? Is he involved? Bryn's answer never changed. He's not part of our story. Technically true. Emotionally devastating. Legally protected by the NDA she'd signed 5 years ago in a moment of desperation. Year 5. The Summit. The National Business Ethics Summit invitation arrived in April. Bryn almost declined. Corporate ethics felt like an oxymoron, and sitting in rooms with CEOs who preached values while exploiting workers made her skin crawl. Then she saw the sponsor list. Ashford Enterprises. Griffin's company rebranded and restructured, hosting an ethics conference like they'd invented integrity. She accepted immediately, not for reconciliation, not for closure, because 5 years ago he'd erased her. Now she'd walk into his world as someone he couldn't ignore, someone who'd built everything he'd tried to destroy. She bought a dress, midnight blue, elegant, the kind that announced you belonged anywhere you chose to stand. Booked a hotel room, arranged for Maya to watch Haven for the weekend, then changed her mind about Haven. I want you to come with me, she told her daughter over breakfast. Where? A work trip. Boring, grown-up stuff. But I want you there. Haven's face lit up. Really? Can I wear my princess dress? You can wear whatever makes you feel powerful. Because if Griffin was going to see them, and Bryn would make sure he did, he'd see exactly what he'd walked away from. A daughter who existed. who thrived, who carried his features and her mother's strength, and had no idea her father had never wanted to meet her. Meanwhile, across the city, Griffin was preparing for the same event with the weight of 5 years pressing on his chest. His assistant, the same one who'd worked for him when Bryn left, had been showing him things. Articles about Safe Harbor Foundation, videos of Bryn speaking at conferences, media coverage of her book, and photos. So many photos of a little girl with dark curly hair and eyes that looked exactly like his mother's. He'd done the math 100 times. Haven's birthday, the timing, the age, the features he recognized in his own childhood photos. His daughter. He'd fired Crane 3 years ago. Too late, but finally. Spent 2 years in therapy unpacking why he'd let a manipulative mentor destroy his marriage. Restructured the entire company around the values Bryn had tried to teach him. But understanding doesn't erase damage. It just makes you capable of not repeating it. If anyone ever trusts you enough to try. He tried reaching out. Calls that went straight to voicemail. Emails that bounced. Letters returned unopened. A lawyer who informed him that Ms. Holloway had no interest in contact, and any further attempts would be considered harassment. He'd lost the right to explanations. Lost the right to apologize. Lost everything that mattered while convincing himself he was protecting what mattered. Now Bryn would be in his conference center, on his stage, in his space. And he'd give anything, for 5 minutes to say he was sorry. He wouldn't get them. Some doors, once closed, don't open just because you finally learned how to knock. Some moments arrive with the weight of inevitability. 5 years of distance was about to collapse into 5 feet of stage space. The grand ballroom of the Ashford Center gleamed with the kind of wealth that whispers instead of shouts. Crystal chandeliers. Marble floors polished to mirrors. Men in suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Women in designer everything, discussing philanthropy between sips of champagne that cost $50 a glass. Bryn walked in wearing her midnight blue dress and armor, disguised as confidence. Haven held her hand, wearing a yellow sundress and light-up sneakers she'd insisted on. 5 years old and completely unaware that every eye in the room had turned to watch them enter. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Bryn Holloway? The author? I heard she used to work in corporate before. That's her daughter. Adorable." Bryn ignored them all. Found her seat in the 3rd row. Settled Haven beside her with a coloring book and crayons. Breathed through the anxiety crawling up her spine. She hadn't seen Griffin in 5 years. Hadn't heard his voice except in nightmares where he told her she didn't matter. Hadn't prepared for how it would feel to be in the same room as the man who destroyed her and never looked back. The lights dimmed. The program began. Griffin took the stage at 10 a.m. sharp. He looked different. Older, obviously. But something else had changed. The arrogance that used to cling to him like expensive cologne. Gone. Replaced by something that looked almost like humility. He opened with pleasantries. Thanked sponsors. Acknowledged speakers. His voice was steady, professional, completely controlled. Then he said her name. "I want to particularly acknowledge Bryn Holloway, whose work with Safe Harbor Foundation has redefined what corporate responsibility should look like. Her programs have become the standard we should all be reaching for. Bryn, thank you for being here and for teaching us what ethical leadership actually means." The room applauded. Bryn's hands stayed in her lap. Their eyes met across the space. She watched him falter mid-sentence, recover, continue like nothing had happened. But something had. She'd seen the recognition, the shock, the way his carefully constructed composure cracked for just a second. Good. Let him be uncomfortable. Let him spend the rest of this conference knowing she was in the room, thriving without him. Proof that his rejection hadn't destroyed her. Backstage, before her own speech, Bryn checked on Haven. "You okay, baby?" "I'm bored," Haven said, coloring outside the lines of a unicorn. "When can we go swimming?" "After Mommy talks to the boring grown-ups. Then we'll go to the hotel pool." "Deal." "Deal." A production assistant poked her head in. "Ms. Holloway, you're on in 5 minutes." Bryn's stomach twisted. She'd spoken at hundreds of events. This shouldn't feel different. But it was different. Because Griffin was out there. Because Haven was backstage. Because this moment would either prove she'd moved on or reveal she was still bleeding from wounds that never healed. She stood, smoothed her dress, became the woman who'd survived the unsurvivable. Wish me luck, Haven. You don't need luck, Mommy. You're the bravest person ever. Out of the mouths of children. The applause, when they called her name, was generous, respectful, the kind reserved for people who'd done something that mattered. Bryn walked onto that stage with Haven's hand in hers. She hadn't planned to bring her daughter out, had arranged for Haven to stay backstage with an assistant. But walking past the green room, seeing Haven's face light up with "Can I come too?" she'd made a split-second decision. Yes, come too. Let everyone see exactly what I built from the ashes you tried to bury me in. The crowd loved it, smiled at the adorable child in light-up sneakers, thought it was a charming touch. Single mother bringing her daughter to a professional event. Only one person in that room understood the devastation of it. Griffin sat in the front row, completely frozen. Bryn watched him calculate, watched the math happen in real time, watched him look at Haven's face, those eyes, that smile, the curls that matched his baby photos, and understand exactly what he'd thrown away. She let the moment stretch, let him drown in it. Then she began her speech. 5 years ago, I was erased. The room went silent. Not physically. I'm obviously still here. But professionally, socially, systematically, I was removed from a career I'd built, a life I'd earned, because I fell in love with the wrong person and dared to believe partnership meant equality. She wasn't looking at Griffin anymore. Didn't need to. Could feel his presence, like a wound that wouldn't close. I'm not here to name names or assign blame. I'm here to talk about what happens after erasure. What it takes to rebuild when you have nothing. Not because it's inspirational, though people love those stories, but because it's reality for millions of women who don't get book deals and conference invitations when they survive. Haven sat cross-legged at the edge of the stage, coloring, completely unaware that her mother was burning down the careful neutrality corporate events demanded. This foundation exists because 5 years ago, someone I trusted told me my programs were too emotional, too expensive, too risky. That caring about people's survival was a liability, so I built them anyway. Not with corporate budgets or investor capital. With food stamps and fury and the absolute refusal to accept that profit matters more than people. The applause started. She raised a hand. Don't applaud. Fund it. Replicate it. Stop using words like family-friendly and work-life balance, while your policies assume everyone has a partner to split responsibilities with. Stop praising single mothers for being strong while paying them wages that guarantee struggle. Stop treating survival like it's inspirational instead of what it actually is, a failure of the systems you control. The room shifted. Uncomfortable now. Good. I didn't come here to make you feel good. I came here because my daughter deserves a world where her existence isn't an obstacle to my success. Where being a mother doesn't mean choosing between rent and dignity. Where the people who build your wealth aren't punished for being human. She looked at Griffin then. Let him see everything. The anger, the survival, the absolute certainty that she'd won by refusing to disappear. Thank you for this award. Use it as a mirror. Ask yourselves what you're actually rewarding. The work or the fact that I survived your system trying to kill me. She picked up the crystal award they'd prepared. Heavy, expensive, meaningless. Safe Harbor Foundation accepts this on behalf of every woman who's been told she's too much, too emotional, too risky. We're keeping the donation. We're not keeping the guilt. The applause was confused, scattered. Some people stood. Others sat frozen, unsure if they'd just witnessed courage or career suicide. Bryn didn't care. She took Haven's hand, walked off that stage, didn't look back. Griffin tried to catch her in the hallway. She saw him coming, moved faster. But Haven, curious, fearless Haven, stopped walking. Mommy, who's that man? Bryn's blood went cold. Griffin stopped 5 feet away, close enough to see Haven clearly, far enough that security wouldn't intervene. "Hi," Haven said, waving. "I'm Haven. That's my mommy. She just talked to a bunch of boring people." Griffin's voice cracked when he spoke. "Hi, Haven. You're beautiful." Haven smiled. "Thank you. Do you know my mommy?" "I used to." Bryn found her voice. "We need to go." "But..." "Now, Haven." She pulled her daughter toward the exit. Didn't run. Refused to run. But walked fast enough that Griffin couldn't follow without making a scene. Behind her, she heard him say her name. Once. Broken. Desperate. She kept walking. The calls started that night. Blocked. All of them. Emails flooded her inbox. Deleted without reading. A letter arrived at her office. Returned unopened. He showed up at Safe Harbor headquarters. Security escorted him out. Appeared at her book signing. She had him removed. Found her brother's contact information. Got told exactly where he could go and how fast he could get there. Griffin Ashford spent 5 years learning what it felt like to be erased. 6 weeks after the summit, Bryn's lawyer called. He's requested a meeting. Supervised. Neutral location. He wants to meet Haven. Formally. With your permission. Bryn sat with that for 3 days. Then said yes. Not for him. For Haven, who asked about her father every week. Who deserved answers to questions Bryn couldn't keep deflecting. The meeting was set for Saturday morning. A park. Public. Safe. With Bryn controlling every variable. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and your favorite moment in this story. And subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles so you don't miss stories like this. We tell stories about people who turned their pain into power. And trust me, there are more coming. See you in the next one. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Bryn dressed Haven in her favorite outfit. Braided her hair. Tried to explain what was about to happen without explaining too much. "You're going to meet someone today." "Who?" "Your father." Haven's eyes went wide. "Really? Does he know about me?" "He does now." They arrived at the park at 10 a.m. Griffin was already there. Standing by the fountain. Looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. He'd done the work. Therapy. Restructuring. Becoming someone worth knowing. But work doesn't guarantee forgiveness. Bryn walked Haven toward him. Watched her daughter's face light up with hope. Watched Griffin's break with regret. And understood that some conversations change everything, even when they come 5 years too late. Haven ran ahead. Stopped 3 feet away. Looked up at the man who'd created her and never known she existed. "Hi," she said. "I'm Haven. Are you really my dad?" Griffin knelt down. Tears streaming. Voice shattered. "Yes. And I'm so sorry I wasn't there before."